Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. So the painting I'm going to go through today was inspired by this view of the River Exe from the banks of the river at the village of Topsham. And Topsham it's a really nice little village. It kind of lies between Exeter and Exmouth. And we were actually planning to get some dinner, but the restaurant we went to, they didn't open for about another half an hour or so. So I thought, well, I'll make use of that half an hour or so and see if I can do a quick watercolour painting of this beautiful view. Now obviously there's a lot going on the river, so I decided to kind of just focus on that little band that you saw there, and in fact an even narrower section of the little band I just showed you. There are a lot of boats. Obviously we've got the landscape off in the distance, clouds in the sky, we've got the hills, we've got the water. So in half an hour there's no way I can capture all of that, so I decided to focus just on two or three of the little yachts, two or three of the little sailing boats, the distant hills, a little section of that, and the trees and the water. And obviously we need a sky to begin with. So while I've been chatting away there, you can see I've put in a pale blue and then just a hint of some of the clouds that are in the sky. But then keeping things nice and loose, I'm now using my round brush loaded with plenty of bluey green watercolour, and just kind of rolling that and letting the brush automatically put in a random pattern along the horizon line. And this is a really nice little technique, because if you try to draw a series of trees, it's very difficult to not subconsciously create a regular pattern. So by letting the brush put down random marks, it tends to create a more realistic effect. So I've just tried to put in a few gestural marks, a bit of shading and a few lines there. So again, we're looking at the central portion of that distant landscape. But I decided to lift off some of that with a paper towel. And that's one of the great things with watercolour, of course, is that while it's unforgiving in some ways, you have to plan ahead reasonably well. If you're quick in the early stages, you can just lift off a lot of it with a damp paper towel. And indeed, that can sometimes give you quite nice subtle effects doing that. So I decided to keep the bluey tree line along the horizon, but now I'm putting in some green of the fields. And this stretch of the river is great, actually. You could look at almost any angle and do a painting if you wanted to. And you can see I've wiped off some of that green I just put down, and now coming in with a darker green to put in some of the hedgerows and the trees that overlay the field. So I've lifted off the blue of the tree line. I also lifted off that first green, or much of it, that I put down. But I've left some of it there. So it's a nice way to get a faded effect on the washes of colour you put down. And the nice big round brush I'm using here is great as well, because, although it's quite a big brush, it does go to a lovely point. So you can get a great deal of different marks. You can put down really big washes. You can do the rolling and random technique that I did for the tree line along the horizon. And now, just using the point of the brush, you can get really quite a precise little line. Now, I don't know if it's coming across on camera, but it was actually quite breezy today. And I actually had trouble kind of keeping all of my equipment organised and stuff. So what I've got here is my little field easel. And you see that post there? I was actually just resting the easel on top of the post and holding it against my lap as I stood there. And it worked reasonably well. So having done a little bit more on the distant landscape, I'm now putting in a wash of a darker blue for the distant water. Now it's difficult to see the colours in the water on camera, but basically the distant water and where the light was catching the water, that was fairly blue, but then the murkier, nearer water, that had kind of a green tinge to it. But also a little bit of purpley brown, actually, so that's why I've put this wash in here. And what I'm doing now is holding the painting upside down, and I've sprayed that wash with water, so I'm letting some of it trickle towards the top of the painting, but I'm also lifting off some with the paper towel. So those quick washes of watercolour applied with the brush have allowed me to establish the scene reasonably well. And this boat is the one I'm actually drawing in now with a watercolour marker, the one sort of centre of screen. when I'm drawing it, it had actually kind of drifted to a different angle, but that's the one I'm working on. So in these conditions, it's still summer, not that hot an evening, but as I said, there was quite a breeze, so the thin watercolour washes, they dry really quickly. So now I'm able to come in with my watercolour marker pen over the top. And what I'm hoping to achieve with this little sketch is a contrast in textures and line work. So I've kept the water and the distant landscape very, very loose. There aren't any lines at all at the moment. But for the boats, I want a little bit more precision. So that's why I've drawn in 3 of those with the watercolour marker. And notice I've kept one in the foreground, nice and big, and then I've put another couple further away to help create a sort of triangle of perspective. So it kind of hopefully convinces the eye that we're going off into the distance as we move up the painting. But I've gone back to my brush now, gone back to a narrower flat brush. The brushes I use are synthetic, and I'm just using this little brush to pop in some washes of deeper blue and some mid-grey. Again, I'm not too worried about detail, but I just want to pop in some areas of shade to create the impression that light is catching this boat. And you can see I've now added some darker greys as well, and I'm using those same greys to introduce a little bit of the reflection in the water. Now, to make the water look nearer to us, at the bottom of the painting, I'm adding in some of the patterning of the water. You can just see on the right-hand side of the screen there, to the right of the painting. And now I want some warmer colours to be introduced. So it's very bluey-greeny at the moment, this painting. But off in the distance there was some orange in the field, where there was some dried reeds or dried grass. Difficult to tell at the distance what it was. So I've added a little bit of that in. You can probably just about see that on the far riverbank. There's a little strip of orange there. But now I've come back to the water and coming in with a dark greeny grey, putting some of the patterning on the surface of the water. And then over the top of that, I'm going back to my nice big brush now, just trying to stay nice and loose and putting in some washes of that dark green. And as you look out across the river, you'll see different patches of light and dark and different colours. And so it's important not to get too tangled up in the detail of what you're doing. But you can see with that big brush, I'm putting in quite fine lines just there, even though a few seconds before, I put down a great swathe of colour. So it's a really lovely brush to use for watercolour work. And now I've lifted off some of that colour again with the water spray and the paper towel. And that's a great way to introduce some random texture, especially when you're dealing with water, actually. And then coming back in with the brush with a darker blue, kind of a purpley blue. There's a little bit of a hint of purple in the water on this particular evening. So again, I'm just introducing some of those ripples in the foreground to help, again, create this sense of distance. And I really enjoy experimenting with the effects you can get by using random washes, lifting off areas of paint, spraying the painting with water from the spray bottle, and then drawing over that with a brush, and then lifting off again. So you can get a huge range of different marks. And obviously there's an element of, there's a random element to the effects you get. But that's one of the great joys of using watercolour, is that it's a very spontaneous medium. And it's always an experiment, basically, always an adventure. Now what I'm doing here is just making the lines around the boat, the lines on the water, I'm making those thinner than the ones right at the bottom of the painting. And generally I'm using more horizontally elongated shapes between those lines than for those lines at the bottom of the painting. And hopefully that's helping to give the impression that the surface of the water is again receding off into the distance. So in just a few minutes using watercolour, and I'm working on a mixed media board, which was vital for working in these breezy conditions, although it doesn't really look like it on camera. In about half an hour or so, I was able to capture that little scene. Now, when we went to the restaurant, we actually found the kitchens were closed on this particular day, so we resorted to the nation's favourite, fish and chips from a local farm shop, but that was really nice. There's the finished painting. Hope you enjoyed this little video, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.